All right, well, I want to welcome you all to our evening with Silas House tonight. This is our culminating event here of a month-long series of events for our One Book Community Reading Project that featured Silas's novel, Eli the Good, which he will read some from tonight and talk about a little bit. So I wanted to give a little, it's a pleasure to be able to give an introduction to Silas. He is the author of so many books that so many of us in this room tonight have loved for years. From his first novel, Clay's Quilt, published in 2001, to the novel we're talking about tonight, Eli the Good, Silas has gifted us with a remarkable collection of work, including the novels The Cold Tattoo, A Parchment of Leaves, and The Same Sun Here, that is co-authored with Neela Beswani. The nonfiction collection focusing on mountaintop removal, Something's Rising, co-author with Jason Howard, who's also here with us tonight. Several plays, including The Hurting Part, and numerous short stories, articles, and essays. He currently serves as the NEH Chair in Appalachian Studies and Assistant Professor of Appalachian Studies at Berea College. Silas has served as writer-in-residence at Eastern Kentucky University in 2004 and 2005, and at Lincoln Memorial University from 2005 to 2010. At LMU, he also directed the Mountain Heritage Literary Festival, and in 2010, he became the NEH Chair in Appalachian Studies at Berea College. He has served on the fiction faculty at Spalding University's MFA in Creative Writing since 2005. Was that from when it started, right? Yeah. In 2010, he was selected as the focus of the Silas House Literary Festival at Emory and Henry College in Emory, Virginia. That same year, he was chosen as Appalachian Writer of the Year by Shepherd University in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. In 2014, he was given an honorary doctorate of letters by Eastern Kentucky University. And in 2015, he received the Caritas Medal for his commitment to social justice. So this is a man of many, many accomplishments, both literary and community and in the field of social justice. I love that about you. I'm getting so hot by this one. I'm so sorry. So Silas and I have known each other for 20 plus years, and we've done a lot of wonderful projects together. It's always a pleasure to work with him. So, he is such, as you all know, such a generous person and so kind and so giving all the time. I just wanted to say quickly two things I love the most about Silas's writing. The first is the authenticity of his voice in fiction. There's an essential truthfulness to his writing that's free of artifice or some forced construct or grandiose literary device. And I did use those purposely to make my point that that's what he doesn't do. And I love that about him. No matter, there's always some element of autobiography in everything that I think that people write, but you know that it's Silas's voice, and yet it is its own story, and that's I think, a trick. So you are an amazing, amazing writer. And then also his ability to tell an unforgettable story. That's the kind of novel that when you think back, you hear one or two key words and immediately you're transported back to that scene in that novel. And I think probably we can list on, a couple of hands the books that really do that for us. And I feel that Silas's work fits that bill. And as I was kind of reviewing for tonight, I was just going back, because I haven't read some of these for several years, And I saw Aneth and Easter, and I was like, well, I remember those, those Pentecostal churches and all the stuff going on, the music and the trucks. And I remember my very first introduction with Clay's Quilt, and that scene on the mountaintop, on the mountainside road in the ice. So you're immediately transported back to them, and that's remarkable. I also want to just tell you that there are 9 counties that are participating in this One Book Community Reading Project this October: Powell, Estill, Rockcastle, Jackson, Laurel, Garrett, Lincoln, Boyle, and Madison. And Silas is the one that made that possible for us to have that many counties. He very generously donated more than 500 books for this project so that all of the counties and schools and the public libraries could participate. because so that children could read this in schools and everybody would have access, and I just find that remarkable and worth also so generous with his time. He's made appearances throughout the region. He's done, things on Facebook, and I've had a lot of fun doing that. So I want to thank you so much for making this possible. I also just want to quickly thank the library staff that has made this possible. We have Athena Gentry in the back there. She's our adult programming coordinator. Thank you, Athena. Mark Green on cameras. Here's our digital services coordinator. And this will be available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel after this. Danny Jacobs, who's serving cake in the back, is our new Berea Branch Services Supervisor. So you'll see him here a lot more. Abby Harris, sitting back there nodding her head, is the one that orders and selects the books for the library and has made the collection possible for us. And John Payne, who's not here but was helping with setup. Did I forget anybody? And then all of course, our Berea Branch staff who have made this event possible. Correct me if I'm missing anybody. No? Okay.
Packed up those 500 books. What's his name?
Oh, that was Josh and John. Josh Strauser for packing up the 500 books to deliver them. Yeah, that's awesome. So I wanted to thank you all for being here, and without further ado, because that was a long ado, but I want to turn it over to Silas. Thank you.
There are a couple seats up here if anybody needs them. These two are free because we're not going to use them. If anybody wants, they're really comfortable seats. So, can you all hear in the back? Can you hear, Rhonda?
Yeah, not too well.
Not too well? You all can come up here. And I'm wondering if people can hear better. Can you hear me right here? Is that okay? So I'd like to be a little closer.
There's one right there.
Well, I'm not going to read very long. I really just want to talk with everybody. I hope people have questions, and I'll be glad to answer your questions and sign books afterwards. So I'm just going to read a couple of things from Eli the Good and mostly tell you what I was trying to do when I wrote the book. That's all right.
Will you move that up so you can use the mic?
I'm good if you all are good. Can you hear?
Yeah.
I usually project pretty well. So I'm going to read you the first paragraph. That was the summer of the bicentennial when all these things happened. My sister Josie began to hate our country and slap my mother's face. My wild aunt Nell moved in with us, bringing along all 5,000 or so of her records and a green record player that ran on batteries. My father started going back to Vietnam in his dreams, and I saw him cry. My mother did the twist in front of the whole town and nearly lost us all. I was 10 years old, and I did something unforgivable. So I'm really in that first paragraph telling you everything that happens in the book and hoping that I've done it in such a way that there's enough mystery left that you want to figure out exactly what's going on. And I especially am dealing with images from my own childhood, moments from my own childhood. My aunt had a green record player that ran on batteries, and I was just always, I loved that thing. You know, I would take it out in the yard, play records, take it to the woods, and I just loved it. It ran on one of those big old batteries. It was like a box and had two things on the top. I can't remember what it's called. But, and then I'm thinking also about my first cousin who wore these American flag pants, and she wasn't doing it to be political or anything. She just thought they were cool pants. But a lot of people were offended by them. They thought that they were disrespectful to the flag, and I think she was somewhat surprised when people reacted to them that way. She just thought they, you know, were in style. And so I always had this picture of her growing up that I loved, where she's just looking really defiant and fierce, and she has her fists on her hips and her American flag pants. And so I used them all throughout the book. If you've read the book, you know that they're really important. And I just wanted to capture one summer in a family's life and show how, to a child, everything can change completely over the course of one summer or a few days, and how a child always feels responsible for everything. When things fall apart, children feel like it's their fault, even if it's not. And so Eli reacts that way to everything that's going on. He thinks it's all his fault. After the book was published, I had letters and emails from lots of people in the field of psychology who diagnosed Eli. I didn't know, this isn't a diagnosis, as I understand it, it's not a diagnosis that's actually like in the, whatever that book of psychology is.
DSM.
Right. But it's something that people talk about called sensitive child syndrome, and it's can be a really debilitating thing. It varies. So Eli has a sort of slight case of sensitive child syndrome. In the book, for instance, when he walks across the yard, he is aware of the ants that he's killing, and he's thinking, I'm hurting things, or if he picks a flower, things like that. And it can become really debilitating for people, you know, where it's hard to go through the world if you're that sensitive. And I knew he was really sensitive, but it's always interesting after a book comes out. I always get my characters analyzed by people, so I enjoy that. And I think they're right. And I was somewhat that way as a child. I wasn't as sensitive as he was, but I was pretty attuned with nature, and was always in the woods. And I had I just loved trees, and so he has a real attachment to trees, particularly beech trees. That's why one's on the cover. And in my mind, I wanted it all to be over the course of one summer, and I knew that I wanted to write about being the child of a Vietnam vet, because my father was in Vietnam. My mother and father are here tonight. And my father was in Vietnam, and I saw the profound impact not only being in the war had on him, but also the reaction the country had when he returned from Vietnam. And so how traumatic those two things were. And so I wanted to write a novel that was pro-soldier and anti-war. And I think those two things are always go hand in hand myself. That, if you're pro-soldier, then you must be anti-war, right? And so, and examine the complexities of that. Really, this book is about 9/11, and it's about living in the years following 9/11. And so I'm taking a family who's living in the years right after Vietnam, and the way Vietnam has changed the country, and they're just symbolic for how 9/11 changed all of us and the way we reacted to everything. And of course, it's 15 years later, and we still know the way that we're still seeing those changes in the way that it's changed us as a people. One thing I was reacting to in particular, because I started writing this book fairly soon after 9/11, was I was somewhat disturbed by the way people were defining patriotism in the days right after 9/11, in that saying that if, patriotism was about putting a flag out or putting a bumper sticker on your car. To my mind, that's not patriotism. Patriotism is service to your country. It's service to others to make you have a stronger country. And so there was a lot of, there for a while we were very united and unified, and then a couple of years in we became really divided again. And that was one of the things that divided us, the way that we thought about patriotism. And so I was writing the book mostly as a reaction to that. In that way, I think it's unfortunately become a timely book again during this election cycle. When so much of the conversation has been divisiveness and othering and things like that. So that's one reason I'm glad that the book has been used a lot in the last 2 or 3 years in high schools and community reads and things like that. I'll just read one section. It's about 3 or 4 pages. Is that because I'm doing something? Thank you. And this, I like this little thing just because one thing I really want to do in the book is put you in the summer of 1976. I think this is one of the sections where I felt like it succeeded. By late June, the world was awfully hot and everything suffered. The heat hung like a mist over the mountains. The leaves baked and drooped on the trees. The river shrank in places, revealing nakedness in the shoals, where only two thin streams of water trickled through. The swimming hole downstream remained full, but the water was still and stagnant looking, moving only at the banks when someone jumped in from one of the cliffs. Hardly anyone had an air conditioner, and those who did found it had very little effect on any part of the house except the room it was in. Whole families spent the hot part of the day gathered in whichever room this happened to be. Others threw open their windows and propped box fans in their open doorways to deal with the heat. My family had no intention of being cooped up in the living room throughout most of the day. We were way too restless for that, so we simply accepted it. Nell and Josie spent much of their time on lawn chairs in the shoals, parking themselves in the middle of the water and occasionally putting their hands down to cup water over themselves. Nell was very white and very freckled. She wore a black bathing suit with a little skirt around the waist, but Josie, who was dark as a Cherokee, had on her two-piece that Daddy had about died over her buying at the Fashion Bug, even though our mother had relented and approved. The suit was pink with ties on each hip, which gave the illusion that one tug of the strings could make the bottoms fall away. Nell and Josie wore matching white sunglasses. Nell had bought them at the Rexall and slathered themselves in baby oil they had spiked with iodine. Everybody did it that way then. They lay back with their arms very straight at their sides. Josie had brought along a small radio that she tied to the back of her lounge chair with a shoelace. The music was distorted by the time it reached the hiding place Edie and I had made ourselves in the cool woods overlooking the river, so that it turned into a game of Name That Tune for us. There was a stream of rock and roll. Queen, Steve Miller, ELO, the Eagles. Nell and Josie's voices were lost beneath the blur of music. My mother arose early and was sometimes joined by Stella, who helped her hoe the garden. Mom paid special attention to her cantaloupes, while Stella tended the tomatoes. They worked in silence for long stretches, but sometimes would talk in low tones for a while too, pausing only to lean on their hoes when either the conversation or the knots of pain in the smalls of their back grew especially serious. Every 2 or 3 days, a thunderstorm would save us all. The storms gave plenty of warning. First there was a breeze, then gusts of wind came twitching down the valley, setting the leaves to rock, turning their white sides out. We all stood outside in the wind, breathing in the air before the oncoming rain. We became so caught up in the smell of the approaching downpour, the best, cleanest scent, that often we didn't have time to get inside before the rain simply dropped out of the sky in a sudden pounding. The rain always fell straight down, so hard that it made perfectly round dents in the dust. By the time I had run for cover beneath the screen porch, the rain was falling on the tin roof with a sound like a great drone of Bible insects descending on us. Other times, the drops sounded like quarters hitting the roof, and I imagined an old man with a wild mane of white hair leaning out of an airplane to shower the world with change. And so, I just loved going back to that time. Eli's about 5 years older than me, so I don't really remember 1976. But, 1981, 1976, not too different. And so I'm really describing the things that I saw growing up. For instance, my cousins were always what we called laying out, suntanning, and they would just slather themselves down with motor oil and whatever they could to get as much sun as possible. And there was always the music, I was really lucky to grow up around all kinds of great music. My mother sang gospel music. We went to Holiness Church, so we had that rollicking music there. And then my aunt Silas just loved all kinds of rock and roll music, and I put a lot of the music is straight from Sis's record collection, one of the first scenes is set to Bob Seger, and that was her favorite. She loved Bob Seger, and the Eagles, and ELO, and Queen, and all that rock and roll. And then also I was always hearing acoustic music, you know, people just playing guitars and banjos and things. And so I always put a lot of that in my books. It just helps me to get into that world. And as I did that, I thought more and more about one thing that kept coming up was the issue of freedom, in that when I was a child, I had so much more freedom than my children have. And that just worked perfectly in a book about patriotism and set during the bicentennial summer, and a book about war. To then throw in the theme of freedom just worked really perfectly, you know. Not only the freedom as we think of it as Americans, that idea of freedom, but also just the way that our freedom has lessened in the last, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. And meaning the way that we feel safe and the way that we feel the world is safe for our children is such a different feeling that we all have. And I mean, I think to some degree we're responsible for that ourselves, just that we're so afraid and we've been taught to be afraid. But at the same time, when you have a 24-hour news cycle, you're constantly having things to be afraid of, right? We've always been told about it. And maybe the world has gotten meaner. I don't know. Maybe we just know more about it. But so I was thinking about freedom, patriotism, 9/11. I was thinking a lot about being weird, being an outsider, because I certainly felt that way as a child. And I think the older I get, the more I realize that most people have felt like an outsider, you know, that it's not that unique a thing, actually. And so I was focusing a lot on that idea. And so I use a book like The Outsiders. They're reading it. And within Eli the Good, there are lots of books. The Outsiders is one. The Diary of Anne Frank is one that I use a lot. She's a child of war. Eli's a child of war. And Frank didn't survive the war. Eli did, but they're both impacted by it. And they both become artists because of that. The other thing I was really thinking about that I alluded to earlier is that, to me, the book is a lot about being of service. And so, while of course we think about going into the military as being of service, right? I mean, we'll even say he or she went into the service when we talk about somebody joining the armed forces. We don't talk enough about how there are lots of ways to be of service to our country, you know? And so to my mind, everybody in the book is of service. They've found a way to be of service. Stanton has gone and served his country in the military. He's been of service that way. But when he comes home, he's been of service because he's entered the workforce in a real blue-collar way. He's a mechanic. So he's literally keeping the wheels of the nation rolling, you know, like so many people do, that we don't talk about it as being of service. The mother's a school teacher. I don't think there's much more you can do to be of service than be an educator, you know, to work in education. Nell has been a war protester. That's how she's been of service. She has stood up and spoken up for injustice and for people who don't have a voice. So I think that's an important service. Eli wants to be an artist. He doesn't totally know it yet, but he will eventually. And I think being an artist is being of service. In fact, when people feel the representatives are not speaking out for them, the first people they go to are artists in the community. And so everybody in the book, every character has that service element to them. So those are things that you weren't necessarily supposed to, you know, like think about blatantly, but somewhere in the back of your mind you were aware of. But that's the way the writer approaches it, is more thematically, and then the plot and the characters rise out of that for me. So I've already talked too much. I want to hear your questions. Who has questions?
I love the section where the book gets its title, where he doesn't want to be Eli the Great, but Eli the Good.
I really like that too. And you know, I find the things that I always like in a book that I write are the things that I don't really feel responsible for. Like, that just came to me. I had struggled and struggled for a title for this book. It went through several titles. And so that was one of the last things I wrote. And the title came to me, Eli the Good. And then I thought, how am I gonna make that make sense beyond just, you know, what's already happening? And so then that scene just came to me, and I really like that idea of thinking about how many monarchs are called, like Peter the Great, or, you know, whatever, I can't think of it right now. Peter the Great would be one, right? But only rarely are kings called the good, you know, so I like that little interchange when he says all the kings who were the greats were great because they killed people, and the ones who were good were actually good to their people, so I want to be Eli the Good. And I always loved the interactions between Nell and Eli, and just to get personal, I think that Eli is who I was as a child to some degree, and Nell is who I am as an adult to some degree. And again, they're both very fictionalized, but when people ask me who I am in the book, they always expect me to say Eli. But I'm probably, yeah, I'm more Nell than I am Eli. But I was Eli to some degree.
Almost midpoint in the book, right around 145 or so, is the remarkable scene when everybody's outside in a circle and listening to the music, and the father is playing and singing. And then, of course, that French is at that scene. Wow. As I got to that point when I was reading, I was conscious of where I was in the book. What sort of deliberation went on? Do you remember? I mean, was that consciously your center point?
Are you talking about the scene where he smashes the guitar?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and the build up to that,
Right.
you know, with the whole
Right.
family gathered.
Yeah. No, I really don't know anything much when I'm writing. A couple of my books have. This book, I never knew what was happening until I wrote it. I knew that things were building, you know, that they were boiling, and I consciously put a Vietnam vet and a famous war protester in the same house, because the best recipe for a novel is trouble plus trouble, you know. The more trouble you can get, the more drama you're gonna have. So it was just a natural peak that it hit at that moment where he just, you know, he'd been quiet as long as he was gonna be quiet. And then I thought it was just, you know, to me, one of the worst things you could do is destroy a beautiful instrument like that. And so I thought that was a good way to symbolize his frustration and the way that, and also throughout the book I'm trying to show history being destroyed or history being covered. And so here's this guitar which is a symbol of his mother, his family, their family history, and he destroys it, you know. That's another thing I was thinking a lot about in the book, was that we don't know our own history properly, mainly because history is written by the victors, you know, and history is also written by the wealthy for the most part. I read this great quote recently that history is written by the wealthy and the songs are written by the poor. But, I mean, that's generalized a little bit. But anyway, I just sort of write and see what happens, and half the time it doesn't work and half the time it does, and that scene worked really well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I just, you know, afterwards it just seemed to me a beautiful construction.
Thank you very much. Yes.
The scene of her standing on the bridge, I held my breath for all those pages, not knowing which way it was going to go. I wondered, as an author, did you know how it was going to go? Did you
She asked, if you couldn't hear, she asked him, at a certain point in the book, the father Stanton stands on a bridge and he considers killing himself. And I won't say anything more for those of you who haven't read it. But no, I didn't really know. And the main reason I did that was during my research. I do a lot of research, and I especially do research on the time period, because I think if I can't put you in the time period and I can't put you in the place, I'm not going to totally have you, you know. Excuse me. And one of the details that I came across was that up to that point, there had never been as many veteran suicides recorded as the summer of 1976. And I wondered if there was some correlation between the kind of over-the-top patriotism that was going on during the bicentennial, combining that with the reaction that a lot of the country had to Vietnam veterans. You know, I wondered if there was something to that. And so then I thought that I needed to explore that in the book. And then I thought, you know, how, well, I will sort of give it away, but I thought how much more interesting it would be if he chose life, you know? And because the character has to move forward, he has to change more than anybody else in the book, you know? There was a parent group somewhere that tried to ban this book because they said it taught women to stay in abusive relationships, but they obviously didn't finish the book, you know, because she gives him an ultimatum finally. She says, "You're either get help or we're gone, we're out of here," you know. And so that was my response to that parents group was, "Well, you should have finished the book." But yeah, I didn't know.
And then when he drove back to town and drove with both hands on the wheel instead of, you had talked before about the left hand being by his side, lifeless, but he drove with both hands. That was.
You're a good reader. Thank you for reading closely.
It was a celebration of life. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jody?
I'm wondering, doesn't the name Eli the Good mean that he's of service? Where it wouldn't have been if it were Eli the Great, it would be more ego.
Yeah, for sure.
And that, to me, keeps him with the theme of service. The other thing I wanted to just make a comment, you said there is plenty in the first paragraph in the way of mystery to keep people reading. I got hooked by the father reliving Vietnam and crying, and at that moment, he mattered. And someone mattering is why I kept reading, because I felt that, you know, I certainly wasn't in Vietnam, but I'm 69 years old, and I went through that whole thing and lost friends and whatever. And
Well, good, thank you.
And I want to say that's the mattering.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yes.
I haven't had the pleasure of reading your books yet. My impression tonight is that Eli is growing up in kind of a pre-television culture, and certainly pre-personal computer and other devices that the kids are so much into now. Is that correct? And if so, do you think that's one of the major differences between then and now?
Well, it's set in 1976, so yeah, he certainly had TV, but he was, one reason that he's outside so much, you know, they didn't have central air, and so he's just not sitting and watching TV that way. And also, you know, we weren't really allowed to sit and watch TV. I mean, I wasn't, and the children I knew, we weren't allowed to do that the way that it seems a lot of children are now. I mean, not that all people allow their children to do that, but it does seem more like people are more attached to screens now, and that's allowed and accepted. So I think, you know, first of all, Eli wanted to be outside, so he wasn't watching TV all the time. Second of all, he was expected to be outside because his mother would have run him out. I was also often outside because my father worked third shift. And so in the summertime, you know, I wasn't in school, so it was either be outside or creep around the house and wake him up, you know, or risk waking him up. So I stayed outside, so it's somewhat autobiographical. But I really only remember really watching TV on Saturday mornings, you know. That was the only time you could watch cartoons, so we always watched them. We watched the Waltons, and, you know, we had a few shows that we watched, but mainly my family, I wasn't allowed to watch TV by myself. I was expected to watch TV with the family. And there were lots of things I wasn't allowed to watch, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a whole different world.
Right, right. Yes.
I've read all your books, and when I read this one when it came out, I just loved it. And I really wanted to come here and talk about it. And I just wondered if you had considered, I like to read, and I love authors that do series, and of all your books, I think Eli can be more than just good, and could really be a marvelous character up into his 90s.
I had never thought about it. I'm gonna take your time. I had never thought about writing more about Eli. I mean, I would love to spend more time with him, but I always just have so many different ideas in my head. I'm always moving on to the next thing, you know. I've now written 1, 2, 2.5, almost 3 more books since. But maybe someday, the book that I would really like to write about, I have an idea in my head to write a sort of short sequel to Clay's Quilt. It would be like a Christmas book, and it's called Clay's Choice. I already know that, and I know the basic plot and all that, but I want to write about that. I want to revisit Clay and Alma again, because I continue to think about them. And there's 2 other characters that I'd really love to write about from They're in Parks and Leaves and the Cold Tattoo. Birdie and her husband, whose name I can't remember right now. Luke, yes. Yeah. They have a very tragic end, but I'd like to see what happens, you know, before, if you've read the books, you know how tragic her end was, but anyway. Other questions?
I didn't get to hear the answer of this on the live talk on Facebook that we did, but I heard you finishing up on it. The songs, all the songs. To put myself during that time, in '76 I was 12 years old. In March of '76 my dad died at 42 with a farming accident. So me and Eli, and I didn't stop reading it. I started reading it and I didn't stop.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But all those songs just put me right back there.
I did a lot of research on the, like, I don't,
Well, that was my question, and
Yeah.
what I think they were asking you about was, did you listen to that music?
Yes,
Was that what you listened
constantly.
to? Was that what,
yeah.
the ABBA was just really cracking me up.
Yeah. And I also, you know, I knew what songs actually came out in July and June, and,
Right,
you know, so I
right.
knew exactly what would be on the radio and all that. So every song really means something. The only song in the book that doesn't have a big symbolic meaning is at one point he's in the car with his sister and her boyfriend, and the song The Rubber Band Man.
Mhm.
That's just sort of a fun pop song, and I just thought that was appropriate for those teenagers, you know. But the rest of the songs have like a profound, deep meaning, like Mother Nature's Child, you
Yeah.
know, and things like that. Or Mother Nature's Son. I always get it wrong.
The thing that's interesting too is like what you're talking about, where we didn't watch much TV. There wasn't much choice. So, you know, and I think one of the reasons we didn't watch is all we have is soap operas
And 3 channels.
and, yeah, so we were outside.
Right.
But the same thing with the radio and the music. We heard what was the most popular, whereas today you can go in and pull anything
Right.
up and
Yeah.
take on a whole genre
Yeah.
that, you know, to listen to if you want to. If you want to suddenly become a jazz and blues
Right.
listener, you can.
Right.
But no, we took what was fed to us,
Yeah.
but that was all.
My whole
that-
world was WOKI out of Knoxville.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what everybody listened to.
I was in Maysville and Fleming, so mine was out Cincinnati. Yeah.
And I was thinking a while ago when I was reading about the box fan, that one of the things that I loved to do most as a child was talk or sing to the box fan. And I have such vivid memories of people being gathered in one room where the air conditioner was on. You know, and even if you would have 2 or 3 air conditioners in the house, only one would run at a time usually. You know, like you put the one in the bedroom on at night and the one in the kitchen on during the day. That's, you know, most of the people in my family. I saw a hand up back here, I thought. Yes.
I was wondering how Josie is of service in the book.
Good question. I think she's very much a service because she's always questioning history. Like, that's her big thing, is she wants to know the real story, and that's really important. So it's sort of symbolic for journalists, you know, the people who ask the tough questions. And I really believe strongly, and some people, a lot of people, I guess, disagree with me about this nowadays, but I believe really strongly in our press, and I believe really strongly in the great job that journalists do. And I'm really particular about the journalism that I consume, the news that I consume. I think one of the dangers of the internet is, you know, somebody can be in their basement on a blog and they put it out there and that's the news. That's the way it is. Everybody believes it. And so I really believe in reading the news and reading reputable news, servicing people who've been trained as journalists and things like that. So that's one thing I was thinking about. She's always questioning history, and she's also really defiant, and I think it's important to be defiant and to question authority that way. And another parent group tried to get the book banned because they said it taught children to question authority. Who else?
I was curious about Loretta, the wife,
Mhm.
and what you really were trying to bring out about her. Was she cold-hearted, or was she just troubled with him and everything else going on?
Well, for one thing, she's one of my most fictional characters in my books. She's totally made up from just, you know, totally fictional. I had already based another character in my earlier books on my mother, so I couldn't do that again. You know? And the main thing that I think defines her is that she's a school teacher and she's a science teacher. And so she thinks she's very logical, and she's very scientific in the way she approaches things. And she's just really intelligent and quiet in her intelligence, no ego or things like that.
But Eli felt that she didn't really love him that much.
Right, and the reason I did that is because I was trying to show how easily children can misinterpret things. And so early in the book, he overhears his mother and father having this private moment, and his mother says, I love you more than anything, to his father. Well, Eli takes that very literally. And I think a lot of children, especially, you know, around that age, they take things very literally. And to him that meant, oh, she loves him more than me. And then it just sort of spiraled into this. And again, that was his sensitivity and his overthinking and things like that. I was also, one other thing I was doing is commenting on the way that this was sort of the age when a lot of divorces started to happen and when people were very conscious of that happening, whereas we don't think a lot about that nowadays, you know. But I remember, you know, when I was that age and somebody got a divorce, it was a big deal. And so it seems like to Eli that like Edie's family is falling apart for real. And so he knows that his parents are really crazy over each other, so he's looking for other ways they're going to fall apart. You know, so he's very on alert for that. And so that's another way that I'm showing that.
But also, Josie, being the kind of gal that she was, she drew a lot of attention from the parents. I lived that life myself. I was one of 4 children, and I had a sister who was kind of a tyrant. And we always thought, the other 3 always thought, well, God, Mom and Dad love her more than anybody because they were always paying attention to her. But now I know as an adult why.
Yeah.
Keep her out of trouble.
Josie was a lot of fun to write because she was unlikable yet very likable. And so playing with that, the way that we like or dislike a character because of assumptions we have about them and stuff was real fun. that's the way I entertained myself for 5 years writing a book, is I challenged myself to be able to do things like that, to make a really unlikable character likable. The only reason she's unlikable is because she's a teenager in that sort of stereotypical way, you know, being really not thinking much beyond herself in her decision making. And I also like that she's just this heartbreaker, you know, I mean, she's based on one of my first cousin who was like a sister to me, and I just remember the string of broken hearts that she left behind her, you know. She just broke every boy's heart, and she didn't care, you know. She would,
I went back and forth feeling sorry for Charles Frazier.
I love
and
him.
I felt sorry for him, and then I'd be like, oh, you big ninny.
Right.
You can't, just need to go on.
Everybody was there for the end.
Right. Anybody else? Are we out of time? I have more time.
Okay, I wanted to ask you something, and I'm deaf, so somebody may have already asked this, and so I don't want to make a big fool out of myself, but the thing that I wonder about when you're writing, how do you, in your timeline, how do you know what episodes to include that are going to hold the reader's interest? Number one, and then number two, do you have a specific audience that you're writing for, or just general? So what do you do about that?
First of all, I don't have a timeline. I don't have any kind of plot outline. I just sit down and write, and I experience it sort of the way the reader would experience it. Now, with that said, sometimes things go the wrong direction, and I just scrap that and I go back from the starting point, you know, and start over. But I pretty much let the story be in control. You know, let the character be in control. What was the second question?
Sorry.
What was the second
I
question?
can't remember.
Specific audience. With this book, I wanted to write a book that could be read by anybody, like any age group. So I didn't write it for young adults or anything like that. But I was a little concerned that one of my first book, Clay's Quilt, was being taught in like 8th grade, and I just thought, I didn't know if I'd want my 7th or 8th grader to read it. And so I wanted to write a book that I would be comfortable with. And so that was my main thing. And I tried to never think about the audience. I try to never think, will people like this or not? Because you're never going to please everybody, so you might as well not even attempt that. Were there other, yes?
The scene after the 4th of July, where Eli walks in on his father's dream, what was that like to write?
That was really, this is a really violent scene where in a night terror, which is a somewhat common thing for some people. PTSD is different for everybody. But night terror being one of the things for Stanton as part of his PTSD, where he thought that he was under attack back in Vietnam, and so he thinks he's choking to death of Viet Cong, but he's actually choking his wife. So it's a really violent scene. I was really worn out after writing that, and it really, the only way I can write a scene like that is really get in, you know, sort of almost a trance-like place. And in a scene like that, you know, I would write really fast and have thought about it probably for days and days and days, and then sit down and write it in like this kind of fever. That scene really wrung me out. There are 2 scenes in all of my books that really had a profound physical and mental impact on me, and that's one of them. And Eli did, and there's a scene in Parchment of Leaves where an assault takes place. That was really hard on me to write. And hopefully it was much harder for me than the reader. You know, I want it to be effective to the reader, but I have to really, really feel it, because I've been living with these characters, you know, 3 or 4 years, so it has to have a much bigger impact on me. Thank you for noticing that scene. Anybody else?
When we were discussing it in my book club group, one of the members brought a letter that her husband had wrote her while he was in Vietnam, and she read it to us
Oh, that's
about
great.
having to kill someone and his best friend getting killed and everything, which really made us just paralyzed.
Right. Yeah, the two things in the book my father won't mind me telling you that are absolutely true are that those are my father's letters from Vietnam that are in the book. And the photographs that I mentioned were actual photographs that I saw from the war that he brought back. A little aside just about the publishing world and what they think about us as Kentuckians. In Parchment Leaves and in Eli the Good, I used family letters, real family letters, and reprinted them in the book, in the novels. And in both cases, I had two separate editors. One editor in Parchment Leaves and one for Eli the Good, who told me that the letters, that they loved them, except I need to go back and make them more grammatically incorrect, to make more misspellings. And so I said, well, I'm not gonna do that because the actual letter, which was written by a real human being, from that time period, from that place, didn't do that. So I just always thought that was interesting and very illuminating about that world.
You made some comments about people trying to ban this book. I was curious if any of your books have been banned.
Not that I know of. I mean, people have certainly been upset by Eli the Good, and probably Same Son Here more, not like an official ban, but Same Son Here is absolutely not taught in a lot of schools because of its content. And it's not about it being vulgar or anything like that, it's because it's about mountaintop removal. So, I mean, that's one part of it. And so, I mean, I know for a fact that there are at least like 20 counties who were all given classroom sets of that book that never taught it because of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I brought it with me tonight too, because
So, you know, not like official bans, but actually,
And it was because of
Pretty
the
much.
mountaintop removal, you said?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Well, I'm glad to hang around and answer questions one-on-one. I'd love to sign books. Where do you
Yeah,
want me
we'll
to do
have
that?
we'll do a sign
Up
up
there?
toward the front, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll head on up there. Thank you all very
Oh, yeah,
much
we have
for
one
being
thing
here.
to present to you. Here is a little book of some of the things that happen in the different counties
Oh, that's
to
cool.
kind of just commemorate it. So, thank you so much. And we have books for sale in the back with Roby Books, so you can buy a book, or if you brought your book and have Silas sign that, and we'll.
All right. Thank you.